All right, there we go. Hello, anatomy. This is chapter 1, chapter 10, 10, part 1, about muscular tissue. Okay, so the muscle tissue is similar to the nervous tissue in that they're both excitable. They can both respond to a stimulus from your brain. Um, but unlike nerves, muscles are special in that they are contractible. They can shorten in length. That's what happens when a muscle contracts. They are extensible. They have the ability to stretch. Here we go. To stretch. Okay, they can stretch. Your muscles can get longer, for example. And then they're elastic, like this elastic hair tie. They can return to their original shape. So contractible, get shorter, extensible. They can extend, and elastic. They can go back to their original shape. The purpose, the functions of the muscular tissue. Your body weight, large majority of it is from your muscle, and if you have more muscle, you're going to weigh more. So first thing, create motion, like we talked about the skeletal system. It works with the skeletal system, the joints, to produce body movements. Also, your muscles are responsible for your posture. Just the fact that you hold your head up constantly when you're standing or sitting, your muscles are constantly working to maintain posture. They also, of course, you have smooth muscle. Smooth muscle makes up these things called sphincters in your body that store substances, like your um, esophageal sphincters. Like, give me a sphincter. That prevents food from going up into the esophagus. Or you have one pyloric sphincter that controls the movement of food or digested food from going from your stomach into your small intestine. Also, the smooth muscle that lines your GI tract is responsible for something called peristaltic contractions. The squeezing of the smooth muscle to push the food down your GI tract to digest it. And they also generate heat. We talked about the 3 different types of muscle before in the tissue chapter. We got skeletal muscle. Where do we find it? Associated with muscles, the skeleton. And it's under voluntary control, skeletal muscle. So I can choose to flex my biceps brachii. Cardiac muscle is found only in the heart. When it's involuntary, that means you don't have to tell your heart to beat. Visceral or smooth muscle is found in different locations, like your GI tract, your uterus, eye, blood vessels, and it's also involuntary. You don't have to tell those things to do what they need to do. Here's just a picture again of what it looks like. Skeletal muscle is striated, and we'll talk a lot about skeletal muscle in detail. We're not going to talk about smooth muscle in detail or cardiac muscle in detail in this chapter. Okay, that's a duplicate, I guess. Okay, so skeletal muscle fibers, again, we're talking more about skeletal muscle fibers, are long cells. Stella wants to be on video. Which can even be over a meter long. Here's a picture of the sartorius muscle in your leg. This is the anterior view, that one. And it contains muscle fibers or muscle cells that are 30 centimeters long. That's pretty crazy. All right. So here's a picture of how your brain tells a muscle to move. So this person is writing. So they're using the muscles in their finger. And there's a communication, a set of neurons that make your hand be able to write. Okay. These neurons that tell a muscle to work are called specifically motor neurons. So here we see a motor neuron. Okay, so this is part of your nervous system, right next to this sarcolemma. You need to know, and you'll have to know, that the sarcolemma, all that is, it's the muscle cell membrane. It has a special name. So every muscle cell has a cell membrane, and it's called a sarcolemma. Okay, so we're going to talk, I'm going to give you an analogy about the organization of muscle tissue that hopefully will help. But on all muscle tissue, there's connective tissue that surrounds and protects and essentially is continuous with the tendons and ligaments to attach those muscles to the bones or other groups of muscles, fascia. Here is just an image of a bone with that tendon and a muscle coming out. And we can see different layerings of that connective tissue. Well, here's epimysium, here's the perimysium, and we'll talk more about that here. Here is a fascicle. A fascicle is a bundle of muscle cells, okay? And this perimysium is around a fascia. In blue here, this is one muscle cell. And again, you can see the sarcolemma is pointed out. That's the cell membrane. Here's the nucleus. A muscle cell is the same thing as a muscle fiber. So when I say muscle fiber, muscle cell, that is the same thing. Okay. Here's a detailed picture of one muscle fiber, one muscle cell. We see some different tissue, endomysium here. And then within a muscle fiber, you can see it circled right here, we have these things called myofibrils. Okay, that's like the chunk right there. And then individual muscle filaments, which we're going to talk a lot about. They're essentially that do the work to contract the muscle. Again, I'm going to give you an analogy that hopefully will put all these pieces together. Some muscles are grouped together, like the quadriceps, for example, or the hamstrings. So a lot of times they're covered in this fascia latae, this thicker continuation of the fascia, that covering connective tissue. And all it does is it in groups of muscles, covers them to keep them together, bundled together. Here's an image of an actual cadaver, and it shows different fascia, superficial and deep fascia. So this is fascia around the muscles of the neck, and then around your abdominal muscles. You can also see in the muscles of the leg. So essentially the fascia is just a continuation of connective tissue that groups muscles together and surrounds them. Another term, thanks Stella, that has to do with muscle connective tissue essentially as a specialized term. It's aponeurosis. It connects two different muscle groups or muscle bellies. An example is the occipitofrontalis muscle. We know that this is the occipital bone, this is the frontalis. Well, you have muscle right here and you have muscle back there, but no muscle really up here. You have this sheet of tissue called the aponeurosis that connects those two bellies, essentially creating one muscle. This is just a horizontal cut through a muscle of the thigh, and you can see the bone right there and how the muscles surround it and overlay it. And then we also see deep in the fascia, we see nerves, arteries, veins. Okay. Beneath the connective tissue, like we talked about, is that muscle cell membrane called the sarcolemma of an individual muscle fiber or muscle cell. Another specialized term for the muscle cells is the cytoplasm of the muscle cell is referred to as sarcoplasm. So you kind of see a trend here. The sarco prefix is associated with muscles, okay? And it's chock full of proteins. And we're going to look more detailed at this image. All right. You need to know these names of the detailed picture of the muscle fiber. Okay, so we talked about the sarcolemma, cell membrane. Sarcoplasm is the cytoplasm. The myofibril is like one of these little chunks inside the muscle cell. Kind of looks like a hot dog. It also looks like something else that I'll talk about tomorrow when I'll bring an analogy in, or whatever day it is within the next few days. You also have these things called T-tubules. You can kind of see it in this image, and triads. This is important. It's going to send some ions through the muscle cell to make the muscle contract. And then the ER, remember we're learning about the ER in the cell. The ER of a muscle cell is specifically called the sarcoplasmic reticulum instead of the endoplasmic reticulum. And we can see that up there. And you're also going to know what a sarcomere is. And there it is highlighted here, or not highlighted, but pointed out there. It's a region of a myofibril that is very important to contraction. You're going to have many sarcomeres lined up right next to each other. And they're going to do the work that's going to contract a muscle. So here is an image of sideways. We're looking at a myofibril, that hot dog. And here's that sarcomere that I pointed out to you, that section of that. Within that myofibril, we have these thick filaments. You can kind of see in darker red here. And thin filaments, which is in yellow. Okay? These overlap each other, and these are important to how a muscle contracts, these fibers. Okay? So they are every other here. Thin, thick, thin, thick, thin, thick. The sarcomere is the basic functional unit of a muscle fiber or a muscle cell. Essentially, the sarcomere is where the work is done to contract that muscle. And it's arrangement of thick and thin filaments, like I just talked about, thick, thin, thick, thin. And they're sandwiched in between these two lines. This is an actual electron micrograph of a sarcomere. Here is a Z disc, that dark line right there, and another Z disc. In between them is the sarcomere. Okay, and there's different parts of the sarcomere, A bands, H zone, that you're going to know. Here they are. So here's the sarcomere, the Z disc we talked about. The M line is essentially the middle. We have the thick and the red. In this image, the darker, thicker red, and then the thin Z discs. Let me see. Next one. All right, this is a good picture. Okay, of the thickened filament. This is even more detailed of what the thick looks like. The thick has these little, what are called myosin heads, because the thick filaments are mostly made up of a protein called myosin right here. The thick filaments are comprised mostly of structural protein called myosin, and they have these little extensions that look like little golf club heads that are called myosin heads. And then the actin or thin filaments are mostly made of the protein actin. That's the yellow here. We'll talk a lot about here, but this arrangement is responsible for making a muscle contract. We also see other proteins. Here's titin, and there's a few other proteins involved that make a muscle contract. And that's the end of part 1.